Welcome to the Vanity Fair Future Series with me, Michelle Jana Chan, exploring how crucial aspects of our lives are shifting and being shaped as a direct response to the dynamic news cycle. We begin with the future of the oceans. Now, our first guest is Kathy Sullivan, oceanographer, explorer, former NASA astronaut. In 1984, the first American woman to spacewalk. She flew on 3 shuttle missions, including the one that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope. And she headed up the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration during President Barack Obama's time in office. Kathy, thank you very much for joining us. Can we start by you telling us where you are and what you're about to embark on?
Hi, Michelle. Great to be with you. I'm aboard a research vessel, expedition vessel, known as the DSV pressure drop, and the 4 letters stand for Deep Submergence Support Vessel. That means this is a ship like you would think of that carries a small submarine, a small 2-person submarine. I'm on the bridge, as you can see behind me, all the controls that will steer our ship starting tomorrow morning out to a place about 200 miles southwest of Guam, where we will do a series of dives in that small submarine down to the deepest point of the world's ocean, the bottom of the Challenger Deep. So I'm talking to you from Guam, from the Port of Opera in Guam.
It could not get more evocative than that. So you're in the Western Pacific, going down to the Mariana Trench, as so many of us know it. Can we talk a bit about the science, Kathy, that you're trying to achieve on this expedition?
Yes, there's interestingly, although it's crazy deep, of all of the ocean trenches on the Earth, the Marianas is arguably the best known. And what we aim to do on this expedition is really 2 things. The big one is to do some transects, some mapping lines across the 3 different deep pools of the Challenger Deep, to just double check and add more precision to the depths. It's very hard to measure depths in the very deep sea quite accurately. So we have 3 different automated instruments that we will put on the bottom, and then we will take the submarine down and make these mapping lines so we can refine how precisely we know the depths of the Challenger Deep. Another thing we aim to do using the robotic arm on the submarine is grab some rock samples from the walls of the deep. And we're looking in particular for rock samples that have a certain set of critters, basically small worms and very small anemones that live attached to the rocks. So when it comes to the things that live in the Challenger Deep, there's been a fair bit of science done on samples of sediment that look at the microbes and the microscopic bacteria and things that live inside the sediment. And there's been some very good filming of the sea cucumbers, the very exotic deep sea cucumbers that are found in small numbers but are found on the seafloor. The third place you find living creatures in a place like this is attached to firm structures like rocks. So there's been very little work done with those in terms of bringing them up to the surface so that you can really study them in great detail.
And let's talk about the journey. The sub is called Triton, the Limiting Factor. It's a 2-person vessel, and it can go down to 11,000 meters. And that's about as high as we go in a jumbo jet, but vertically down. Now, we feel like, I think we have a sense of what it might be like down there, cold, dark, and the pressure increasing. And the actual object that you go down in has this hull. It's nearly a meter thick of titanium alloy. But all this for me is dry statistics. Kathy, what does it mean? Let's talk about pressure.
Well, every 10 meters you go down in the ocean, you add another atmosphere of pressure. So we live at 1 atmosphere at sea level, and our bodies are very used to having this amount of pressure on us. 10 meters down, it's double, and every 10 meters beyond that, it gets more and more. So it's 1,000 atmospheres. It's like a giant elephant sitting on you if you were really exposed to it. So the heart of the limiting factor, the submersible that Triton have built, the heart of it is a titanium ball, a sphere, as you said. It's a hollow sphere. It's about 2 meters or 6 feet in diameter. The wall thickness is about 7 inches, 14-ish centimeters, 18 centimeters. And that is strong enough to withstand all of the pressure, not only at the 11 kilometers that we'll be at, but it's strong enough, and it's been tested actually to withstand half again that much. So it's a very strong shell. And the essence of that is, we human beings we can only tolerate a very narrow range of pressure, a very narrow range of temperature, and the bottom of the ocean is way beyond those ranges. So we need to create a small environment inside the sphere where we have the same kind of conditions our bodies are adapted to, despite the fact that right outside that window is 1,000 times the pressure and almost freezing temperatures of water. So that's the essence of it. It's an inner spaceship is the way to think about it. Just like a space shuttle lets you go out into space where there's no air, no pressure, super hot, super cold, but inside your spacecraft, it's just like this. The submarine is that, but going down to huge pressures and cold temperatures.
And something so much about going in both directions. At this point, I think maybe it's a good time to share, if you will, your show and tell that you brought to show the viewers.
Yeah, because you had commented all these things we just talked about are, they're numbers, and they're numbers, and they're numbers that describe experiences so unlike what any of us have had. It becomes hard to really imagine or comprehend, well, what does that mean? So some years ago, one of my NOAA colleagues did me a favor. I sent out to her on her research ship a styrofoam head, so the same size as my head, but made out of styrofoam. This is the kind of thing your hairstylist might have in their salon to put a wig over it and practice hairstyling. So she took this styrofoam wig head, she gave it a face, decorated it all up. And as they put some scientific equipment down in the Pacific Ocean, they let this ride along in an open bag. So it was exposed as the instrument went down, this styrofoam wig head was exposed to the increasing pressure. This only went to about half the depth we will go to. It went to 5.5 kilometers. So the head that was this big, just like you see here, is now this big. So you take my head out of styrofoam, you take it half as deep as we will go in the next few days, it would shrink to this size. And I brought this with me because I plan to put this one on the outside of the limiting factor and take it down the other half of the ocean depth and see how much smaller does it get at 11 kilometers. So, it's a little known fact that oceanographers are fond of shrinking heads in this fashion as a way to illustrate the immense pressures that you experience as you go deep in the sea.
Yeah, about the size of a cheek now. Well, let's just kind of keep it to the styrofoam head, Kathy.
Half the size of my hand.
I want to talk about risk. In your new book, My Show and Tell is your new book, Handprints on Hubble, just published by MIT. You mention in this book your chats with your dad just before a shuttle launch, the just in case chat. I wonder, was that for him, or was that as much for you too?
Those chats are always for both of you. For me, it was wanting to know that he heard directly from me. I know what I'm going into. I do understand the risks. And here's why I find it valuable. And so I'm okay. If something bad happens, a really bad day, know that I knew what I was doing. Know that I had a sense of purpose for doing it. It wasn't just to say, golly gee whiz, I went and did something exciting. And that purpose mattered enough to me to be willing to accept the risks that inevitably will still be there. They can never be made to go exactly to zero, not in the submarine dive and not in a shuttle flight. My father was an aerospace engineer. He knew all about the risks of designing airplanes and missile systems. He had seen plenty of tests go wrong. He'd seen missiles blow up and explode. So he knew very well all of what I was talking about. And it was very, very much for both of us to have that conversation.
Do you think our appetite for risk is changing because of COVID-19? And if so, which way is it going? Do you think that's affecting our appetite for risk?
Well, I think you have to distinguish the collective appetite of a family or a community or a country and the appetite, the tolerance for risk that individuals may still have. Because with COVID-19, as an example, leaders that have to make these decisions about quarantines or public health measures, they're having to try to judge on behalf of large groups of people. And it's a hugely horrible and tough thing to do. The information's never complete and perfect. There's always lots of uncertainty. But as anyone who does exploration knows, trying to avoid the decision is a decision in its own right with its own set of consequences. So I don't think that these large-scale social problems like the pandemic or other factors that affect many of us at once, I don't think they change every individual's sense of adventure or sense of challenge or willingness to accept some risks in return for the right, something they judge to be a valuable reward. That reward might be monetary, it might be fame for some people, but for many others, for someone like me, it's there has to be a purpose that is beyond just my personal renown or something financial. For me, it's all about the value of really deeply understanding this planet and how it works so that we can learn how to live more wisely and well on it as a human species. I think that quest for knowledge and understanding that we can translate into information that matters for living well on this planet, I think that quest for knowledge is very worthwhile, and I think it's worth some amount of risk in pursuit of the knowledge that we need.
Back to the dive, Kathy, and you're going to be traveling with one other person, the pilot, Victor Vescovo. But tell me more about the descent, about how you get down nearly 11 kilometers to the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, so I find it fascinating. It's 11 kilometers down, as you mentioned, it's like as high as a jetliner flies above the Earth. It seems like it's a huge distance. But on the other hand, it's 11 kilometers. That's about half the length of the island of Manhattan. So I'm very impressed about this thought of descending that deep into the sea. But on the other hand, I've walked the length that we're going to go down. It will take us about 4.5 hours to descend that depth. If you asked Google Maps to tell you how long it would take you to walk half the length of Manhattan, its estimate would be twice as fast. So that's their guess for an average walker's speed. So we will descend like a dirigible at about half the pace that you probably walk. It'll take us about 4.5 hours. Our batteries will allow us to spend 3 to 4 hours or so on the bottom, maneuvering around, using the robotic arm, illuminating the bottom so we can get video. And when we're done with that, we'll drop some weights and leave them on the bottom. That will make the sub positively buoyant again, and it will rise back up to the surface. It comes back up a bit faster than it goes down. So, 4 hours up. So it's a very long day. It's basically a 12-hour day in the submersible. And then the expedition team overall starts working hours before we get in the sub, because we put other instrument packages down to help the submarine navigate and to get additional data. So the expedition team is really working, an 18-hour day, putting equipment into the water and getting it back out, including Victor and me in the submersible.
And the landing itself, all about, I think, a good docking. Is it important that that's feather light or can you thud onto the bottom of the seabed?
Yeah, you don't want to thud onto the seabed, mainly because in the Challenger Deep, the bottom is very fine silt. So even if you thudded down, sinking more quickly than you expected, it's unlikely you could really seriously damage the submarine, but you would just roil up these billowing clouds of sediment that would obscure anything you could see. And it's such fine scale material, it's not going to settle quickly. So I think we will kind of barely touch bottom. And most of what we're doing most of the time as we're doing these mapping transects, we'll go about maybe a meter or two above the bottom. We've got a sonar that looks downward that can help us control and measure how far off the bottom we are as we make these mapping lines back and forth.
I want to bring in a first viewer question here from Marcus Mercer in London. He asks if you're going to be seeing various marine creatures on your way down, like through a window. Is there going to be a visual as you're going down and seeing stuff in the water?
Yeah, we have 3 viewports that look sort of one straight down on the center line and 2 sort of off to the side. Below about 1,000 meters, we'll have to turn our lights on to see anything in the water, unless the movement of the submarine itself triggers some bioluminescence, some natural chemical light in the organisms. I haven't dived with Victor before. I'm always fascinated to watch the water column as we go down because there is life throughout the entire water column. So I will be fighting competing instincts. One will be turn the lights on periodically so I can see the marine snow or whatever critters we might be going by, and the other will be save the batteries so we can stay on the bottom longer.
In your book, Kathy, in the first chapters, you write about how it was a desire for travel and adventure that motivated some of your early life choices. Right now, they seem so out of reach, those kinds of notions. And only that, notions rather than anything more real. I wonder if this idea of recalibrating, not as a collective consciousness, as you mentioned, but more on an individual level, do you think there will be an adjustment of dreams for the, for the young people who were your age when you were having those kind of thoughts to explore, and this kind of the ideas of freedom and how COVID-19 might be changing us?
It's an interesting thought to contemplate. I suppose it might truly change them in an irreversible way for some people. I think at a minimum, what we've learned, at least what I have taken away from it, is a fresh appreciation for how glibly, how blithely I could, pop around the planet up until this pandemic hit. And in a sense, how much more I value the prospect of being able to do that, and to be more selective about it. So it's not just, gee, I think I'll pop from here to there for a weekend. So, maybe it will be a long time. Maybe we won't get back. Either our motivations will shift, or ground rules and public health factors will stay in place for a long time, and we will all slow down. What I have found as a peripatetic person most of my life, I've actually found I've quite enjoyed not moving so macro, so rapidly. And whenever I do slow down, I usually find the same sorts of challenges and curiosity I've been pursuing out there. It has actually also been right nearby me at a different scale, and gives me very much the same kind of value and satisfaction. So it's been good for me to rebalance. And I hope that's where it really comes out, that there's a rebalance to both some greater richness, greater and richer awareness of the right around me, what's there to discover, what's there to explore, what's there to go deeper into, rather than always doing this. So that's what I hope I have taken from it, and that we maybe all get a little glimpse of. Where it will end up a year from now or 2 years from now, I don't know. But for young people coming up right now, don't let ground rules of the moment dampen your dreams. Go carry on and dream big, and just know you will have to find a way to get that done as you go forward. But that's the nature of exploration. It never happens quite the way you actually planned. Michelle, one of the other adages I write about in the book: plans are nothing, but planning is everything.
Yes.
Because your plans are never going to turn out quite as you intended. But what you learned by planning it out, what you learned by thinking about, why would I do this? How would I do this? How do I get it done? That learning will serve you well as you go forward, no matter what the circumstances become.
Kathy, although you're probably best known as an astronaut, your academic roots were oceanography, were geology, they were earth sciences. And over your lifetime in this field, how do you feel our relationship has changed with the ocean?
In the scientific community, we've certainly learned substantially more than we knew when I started out. And there are, much better tools than we had before. There are now automated vehicles and tethered vehicles that can explore more of the ocean than we could do when I came along at the beginning. We have learned more about the biology of the ocean, in particular the genetics and the microbial life. There's still, though, such a vast amount we don't know. Just so much we don't know, for example, just about the fisheries, the fish populations that we harvest to feed, to grind up into pet food, to make fish oil, and to put on our restaurant plates. We still don't know enough and understand enough about those populations to manage them sustainably. So we keep having fish stocks crash. So we've got some better tools. Scientifically, we're asking some better questions. I wish the sort of general public's sense of relationship to the ocean and understanding of it had advanced more than I think it has. I think still for most people on the planet, the ocean is that nice blue thing on a lovely postcard, or that pretty place you get sand between your toes, or you hear the waves crash, but it's not really understood and really deeply appreciated as the largest living environment on our planet, and absolutely critical element in how we get our oxygen, how our climate system works, how our weather works. I currently live in Ohio in the United States, which is a landlocked state. And if you say to most Ohioans, did you know you are an ocean citizen? They'll say, no, I'm from Ohio. We don't have an ocean. But they are ocean citizens. Every other breath they take is oxygen produced by the ocean. The climate they experience, where crops can grow, that's all moderated, it's all tempered, it's all basically set by the ocean. So, we are all living on an ocean planet, and I do wish that was more front of mind for more people.
And so why isn't it? Why has it not captured the imagination like space exploration has? I mean, is it down to, I know NASA's PR budget is enormous compared to something like NOAA's general budget, and I'm wondering if that's ultimately the problem. It's funding and trying to win hearts and minds, which now funding, of course, is even harder to come by given the state of the global economy. But is communication one of the big problems?
I think that is a problem. I don't think it's the largest one. And there's been quite a lot of writing and musing on this question, because when I was 8 or 9 or 10 years old, it seemed like the focus and vibrancy of exploring space and the ocean were running neck and neck, very much sort of on a common level. And then, as you point out, it sort of diverged, and the space program and space investments became huge, and not so for the oceans. I think for the United States, at any rate, some of that was from the beginning. The driver behind the space investments were more about geopolitics and national security than they really were about space as a place of importance. And space does have a different role in surveillance and monitoring that remains critical to geopolitics and national security. There's another line of thinking that I find fascinating, and I think I align with it, and that is, it's so easy for space to be an aspirational kind of thing. And you see this in the Western art, American and European space art, is always, grand vistas, very sort of lofty, reaching for great objectives, very, very positive sort of motivations. And the sea, on the other hand, if you think of how the sea is figured in paintings, in literature, and human experience, it's Homer's cold, dark, fish-bearing sea. It's the stormy presence that, sinks ships. You can't see very far underwater. So all of the things that might be natural aspirational draws to humankind are very different and sort of easier to grasp in the space environment than they are in the ocean. And when you then add to an agency like NASA, whose charge was partly infuse this inspiration of space into the American public, and here's a budget to do it, and they've done it quite well.
But does not geopolitics and kind of the superpower race also come into play now with the oceans? I mean, you throw, well, let's have you can hear Trump's words a few days ago when SpaceX launched. It was about American rockets, the best in the world, American soil. Throw some Chinese and Indian ambitions into the mix, you've suddenly got a geopolitical race potentially. Is that something that actually, the competition could act as a catalyst? Could it be healthy for the ocean exploration too?
I suppose it could have been so. If you had created truly a NASA equivalent for the oceans in the United States, you say to NASA, your job is to inspire people about the American prowess on the space frontier, and to the other guys, your job is do the same about the ocean frontier. But the ocean frontier became a much narrower geopolitical and national security realm. And the Navy, from an operational Navy point of view, you sort of only care about the upper maybe 1,000 feet of the ocean. And it's a place where you're fighting each other in a stealthier way. So I think there are a set of factors there that nothing teed the ocean up to be treated in quite the same way in the public imagination or by public expenditures. Again, I'm speaking only about the American experience. It's the only one I know in some detail. Interestingly, if you look at Soviet space art from the same era when NASA got started, it's a much darker, more foreboding, this is hard and it's challenging and it's something sort of that, is wringing strange, dark energies out of humankind. Very, very, very different approach to the art and the way it was expressed to the public. Also laced with the grand Soviet man ideal, of course.
And I also wonder if it's about landmark moments. There was a very big moment in the descent over 10 kilometers to Challenger Deep in it's almost 60 years ago, and that was 10 years before the moon landing. But could many people name the crew that went down to the Mariana Trench? Much less so than the man that first stepped onto the moon. So I wonder if it's these landmark moments, and are there any in the oceans that could be coming, that could drive ocean exploration? These kind of these essential moments that allow a public imagination to be caught.
Yeah, maybe so. I think the landmark moment in space was Sputnik. And of course, the absolutely cosmic first event. And one of the key differences is Sputnik went over everybody's head. Everyone has the stars over their head. Everyone has the moon in their sky. And Sputnik went over everybody's head. Don Walsh and Jacques Picard alone with a small group of Navy guys went off in the ocean. So it's just space is around all of us, and the ocean to many people seems not in their world at all.
Okay, maybe something else we could shout about, from the ocean's PR point of view, is the marine species that you're talking about too, that that might not even yet be discovered, that could, in the words of trying to save the rainforest, that might end up curing cancer. It's the same argument that perhaps we could use. Particularly now, trying to use the medicine argument of how it could, unknown species could advance medicine or clinical virology. Could it be a moment to capitalize on that? Are these kind of devices necessary?
I think they help. The Census of Marine Life, which completed now so many years ago, but I think that campaign, 10 years of going and exploring and finding out what's out there, what species, what biota where. And as I alluded to earlier, everywhere you looked, you found tens to hundreds of species you had never imagined. And I think that group did a pretty good job of doing, as you're saying, reveal to people this extraordinary census of life and these exotic, fascinating life forms, that they are of intrinsic value in and of their own right as part of the living elements that make our ocean work. But many of them also may be fascinating bioprospecting compounds that could have tremendous benefit to human health and to society. Here's a 10,000 we found, hardly without trying. Take a spoonful of seawater, you'll find 5,000 more. And let's try to stoke that curiosity.
Another viewer question for you, Kathy, from Jonathan Genton in Marlborough in the UK. Do you think that the relative spending on scientific research into the exploration of space versus the exploration of the oceans, maybe extending that also to climate change, research into pandemics and so on, do you think all this relatively spending is about right? Or how, if not, how would you change that?
Yes, well, you don't have to worry about this scenario. No one ever will put me fully in charge of these things. On the space frontier, if you look at, say, a NASA budget and most of the space agency budgets, it's a bit misleading because most of the budget amount still is engineering to create the spacecraft and the devices, and not as much as I would like to see even in the space frontier to support the minds, the intellects, the scientists that are extracting the insight and the information from the data that we can get. I think that's triply true in the ocean. And again, I really only know some of the US figures decently well, but basic research, fundamental understanding of what's in the ocean, how does it work, what's the meaning and significance of it all, that really most fundamental work, investment there has been declining in the United States, both through our Office of Naval Research and our National Science Foundation, which are the main groups that do that work. It's been on a slow decline for many decades. And part of what that means is you're losing the funding resources needed to attract graduate students to create the next round of talent, the next bevy of researchers and engineers that will create the new devices, ask the new questions, probe the new aspects of the ocean and continue our learning there. It's just getting a thinner and thinner base. The NASA budget in the United States is something like 0.8 of a penny out of each tax dollar. If you put me in charge, I would round that up to an entire penny. It would not break the bank. And the ocean investments, in contrast, might be maybe 0.2 of a penny. And if you put me in charge, I'd round that up to a full penny as well, at least.
With the technology moving apace, which, as you mentioned earlier, such as underwater robots and remotely operated underwater vehicles, I'm sure you're guessing my next question because you've had it numerous times for space, but do human occupied vehicles have a place in our future, Kathy?
Yeah, I believe they do for a couple of reasons. If you only need data and you know the data you need to illuminate a problem or answer a question, then by all means an automated system can do that just well. If you don't know what's there, then the richer array of human intelligence, the recognizing and observing features or phenomena or aspects that you didn't know to program or prepare an instrument to sample or to measure, to observe, that is sort of the quintessential value of the human being. Don Walsh, who piloted Trieste to the Challenger Deep in 1960, he's also fond of pointing out another dimension that I agree with, which is robots never get ticker tape parades down Madison Avenue. So that thing in all of us that wants to admire, that wants to taste the heroic, that wants to feel connected to these frontiers of exploration, that is invariably a human-to-human connection. One anecdote to amplify that a little further, some planetary scientists back in the 70s created an outfit called the Planetary Society because they felt there should not be so much investment in all these crazy spaceships that take people. There should be more in the automated spaceships, and that's really what everyone wanted, was just the understanding. They got thousands of members in the society, and about 10 years in, they did a survey of their membership. Why are you in this society? What do you care about? What's important in space? And this is Carl Sagan and Lou Friedman. 10 years in, they asked their fan club that they created because we don't need the humans going, we just need machines. And the majority of their own members said, I want to go. What motivated them to be a part of this effort was that, boy, would I love to go myself. It's a fundamental human instinct.
So that kind of aspiration, is that why we need someone of your pedigree going down to the deepest part of the ocean? Because arguably there are more interesting parts of the ocean, probably from a scientific perspective, for you to look at and discover, but we can't help but be lured in by these extremes, by these records.
Yeah, well, I'm lured in because the ocean trenches have fascinated me for a long time. My own work in oceanography was on the spreading ridges, the mid-ocean ridges. I've had a chance to see those up close and personal through a different submersible many years ago. So I'm fascinated to get to see a trench environment and what's really down there. I'm not persuaded it has to be someone of my academic pedigree. I think the value of having someone who's a good storyteller, someone who can respond to and embody and feel and express and share with others the passion, the purpose, the curiosity, the wonder. But to me, it wouldn't matter if I had no credentials mounted on the wall of my library. If we'll take you, Michelle, you're a great storyteller and interviewer. I think we're drawn to fellow human beings who embody a story and who express it with some passion and some vividness that we can connect to. This right where we started before. Don't just give me the numbers. I'm not sure I make sense of the numbers, but what did you see? What did you do? What was it like? What's there? That's where we always start our connection, and then we can expand and elaborate the story from there once we've made that really rich connection together.
So what is the story as a way forward? Is it this greater purpose of sustainable development? Or is that just this turn off, this combination of words is this turn off? Or can we make sustainable development the reason why it's important?
Yeah, I think for me, I think in terms of the general public, going up, I don't want to instruct you on how to do sustainable development. I want you to fall in love with the mystery and the majesty of this planet and the ways that it works to sustain all the life that lives on it, including yours. And as that famous adage that I won't manage to quote properly says, if you want people to go out to the sea, don't instruct them on how to build a boat and nail the bits together. Make them fall in love with the sea, and they will develop the means of learning about and mastering getting out on the sea. So I think for the general public, sustainable development would come about from a richer appreciation and passion for and respect for this incredible planet that you live on, just as your home. You take good care of your home because it's your home, because you value it, you treasure it. You leave your kids in charge of the house for the weekend as you go off. That's not permission to trash the house just because they're in charge for a week. It's the opportunity to steward and take care of the home that you all value. How do we get to that? We all value this home to enough of a degree that I'll do what I can in my sphere to take good care of it. And then we each do that at the different levels in which we work and operate. Some point, we will all then figure out and learn the means and methods of living and developing things sustainably. But I think it needs to start as a hook of passion, not an exercise of intellect.
Yeah, I mean, because it can get you down. I think there's a lot of doomsday rhetoric when it comes to the ocean. We talk about overfishing, we talk about plastic pollution, we talk about the climate change effect on the oceans warming up. And I think there is a real desire for the magic that you described, the stories of hope, Kathy. On World Oceans Day, there's this push for 30% of the oceans to be protected by 2030. Right now, it's 2.5%, I think. What is it? Legislation that's going to get us there too? Is the UN kind of looking at the high seas and those kind of waters in terms of protection? Is that what's going to actually be the sea change, to pardon the pun?
I think it's going to most importantly be actions of nations, because it really is nations that have the key authorities, the key responsibilities. And so I think building coalitions, as in my time at NOAA, Secretary John Kerry worked very diligently through the series of conferences that he inaugurated, the Our Oceans conferences, to bring ocean leaders together, to bring heads of state together, to make the case to them, both the intellectual case, but he and all of us who work with him very much were making this passion, commitment, stewardship case to get the heart set so the minds and the actions could follow. And there were sizable advances in ocean protected areas spurred by that set of conferences. Beyond the jurisdictions of nations, yes, the UN can play a role, but the challenge there will always be to come back to how do we make those decisions stick? How do you make them sufficiently binding on the people who traffic the high seas, that they act accordingly? So it's great to have a UN statute or a UN provision on the books, but without some provision to connect that back to real human behavior, you see actions continuing on the high seas that have been ground ruled out by the UN, but there's not a feedback mechanism, there's not an accountability mechanism with teeth to make sure it sticks in the actions of high seas fishermen, for example.
Kathy, I cannot not explore what you've achieved in the other great frontier of space, and it might be interesting to point out that although the headline for today is the future of the oceans, so many of the questions submitted hit your career in space. So I want you to take us there with you just for a few minutes. In your book, you describe blasting off in Discovery as a combination of an earthquake, a rock concert, and a fighter jet. And I'm right there with you when you write that. But how about the spacewalk, which looks so peaceful? Is it as serene as it looks?
Yes and no. So a space suit is its own spaceship. It's just a spaceship that happens to be shaped like your body. But in that backpack that you're wearing, you have in miniature all of the same equipment that keeps a space shuttle pressurized and breathing oxygen and everything else. So you're a single pilot of your own spaceship when you're doing a spacewalk. It's not silent inside the suit. You're hearing the fans and pumps and motors. You're wearing a computer on the front of the suit that you pay some attention to just as a pilot checks the instrument panels periodically. But you do so much training before you put a spacesuit on in the real world and go outside where there is no air. The suit feels very natural. The sounds are very familiar to you. You've become so attuned to the sounds that you would detect the tiniest little flutter in one of the fans or motors. So you really do end up focused on what you're doing. The other reason it looks serene is because the lesson or the art form of maneuvering well and working well in zero gravity is go slow. Even when you're in the cabin, just you and your shirt sleeves, you slow things down. You look very much like a scuba diver underwater. Fast movements don't help. Slow movements work really very well. And when you then put on the extra mass of the spacesuit, I would weigh about 3 times as much when I put the spacesuit on. It's got twice the mass of my body. So now you want to go even slower, because once you start yourself moving in a spacesuit, you'll just keep moving forever until you stop it. And it's going to take more muscle force to stop a hefty thing. So you don't feel the weight when you put the spacesuit on, but the mass is still there, and your muscles get very attuned to having to deal with that extra mass.
A quick Hubble question, if you don't mind. You were on the mission that deployed the Hubble Space Telescope in 1990. It's totally revolutionized our understanding of the universe. Is that what oceans need? Something like Hubble, like perhaps this idea of networked remote vehicles on the seabed that communicate with each other and also tell us what's going on in real time? Or is looking down towards the core of the Earth just never going to be as good as looking up into the far reaches of our heavens? For you, Kathy, for you.
Yeah, Hubble, some of the magic of Hubble is that it got launched just as the internet was coming of age. So the fabulous camera it had aboard after the problem with the mirror got fixed suddenly could be shared around the world with everyone on their desktop computer, and nowadays, on the phone we carry in our hands. And that is, I can't think of any other time in any other field of science where this happened to the degree that it happened with Hubble. And the scientific results in Hubble's images got just perfused into the public imagination. I see them on lunchboxes. I see them on the side of self-hire trailers. You see them, people have tattoos of Hubble, and it's crazy. It's everywhere. Again, the stars are over everyone's head. Everyone looks up at the night sky many times in their lives, is impressed by the beauty or dazzled or bemused and wondered about what's up there. And then these spectacular images keep coming out on magazines and everywhere else. There are some very substantial ocean observatories off many of the coasts that have been collecting scads of data for a long time. It doesn't turn into the same kind of picture. It doesn't get out into the popular imagination as Hubble did. But again, the ocean is not right over everyone's head. It's not right on everyone's doorstep, easily there to fall in love with as the moon and the stars are.
Staying with the idea of the next generation, when you became one of the first female astronauts in 1978, there was such a buzz about that at the time. How different is it now for women in exploration, or how is it not different?
I think the key difference is more slowly than I would have liked. Women have moved up and moved into every role in exploration. They're the chief scientist, they're the principal investigator, they're the instigator of the projects, they're the askers of the questions, they're the principal people that muster the funding and put the team together and set the culture for the team and direct and steer the team. When I first went to sea as a graduate student, the captain of one of our ships expected me to serve hors d'oeuvres during the VIP party in port, because that's what girls do. I had personally outfitted one of the laboratories aboard the ship, trucked the gear down, installed it, all of that stuff. All of that didn't matter for a bit. Since you're a girl, you're going to serve hors d'oeuvres. You won't be surprised to know I did not serve hors d'oeuvres at that reception. But it was still unheard of for women to be in charge of things. It was a big deal that I was at sea as a junior researcher and not just as someone's technician. I did have my own standing and my own projects, but it was, very, very low on the totem pole, low enough that I could ask you to be a waitress if I wanted to. So I'm pleased to see that, because it does start to change, in my view, for the better, the overall culture of the scientific field. It helps us realize and show to everyone that there are multiple paths to excellence. It doesn't have to be a highly combative, male locker room kind of environment. That's not the only way that you spur each other to really perform at an outstanding, excellent level. There can be more constructive ways to do that are more palatable and accepting to people of other cultures, to both genders. And I've seen that work many, many, many times.
To coin a tip from your book, I remember stay smart and stick together. But there is still this lack of diversity, Kathy, particularly at the top. And do we just let that kind of organically, slowly improve?
You can't just do a laissez-faire, someday it will get better. There need to be conscious and deliberate actions to improve culture all the way through the pipeline. Yes, the physical sciences in particular are still predominantly Anglo, predominantly Caucasian, predominantly male, even in the United States. I think there's a whole host of cultural factors that probably start in the household and childhood, but certainly really start to become influential in college years, that still push a lot of women and girls out of those fields. And then there are, key, if you're going down an academic pathway, key years in your academic development as a researcher coincide age-wise with the years that men and women both are marrying and starting families, but the impact of that falls disproportionately on women than it does on men. Mm-hmm. Somehow we have to find mechanisms, compensation mechanisms, leave-taking mechanisms, and so forth, that prevent that being a one-way path out of the field for really talented women.
Well, you're a proponent, I know, of getting more girls and women into studying STEM and working then in those fields. So I've got a few questions from some schoolgirls for you. There's this from the 6B pod at Glendower Prep in London. We call them pods now, Kathy, here, because we have these very enclosed communities of kids who can't mix with other kids at the same school because of COVID. So their question is, what is the best thing about being an oceanographer?
For me, the best thing about being an oceanographer is getting to go out to sea. I love being at sea on ships. I particularly love being on working ships where you're part of making the whole thing work. You're not just riding along in a nice stateroom. I don't mind that on some occasion. But I really most love to be part of a really integrated team that's asking and answering questions together, and together works to bring and create or bring together the tools, the equipment, the intellects that we need to ask a question no one's ever asked before, and then to build the means of answering that question and add some new knowledge, some new understanding of the ocean. It's I remember vividly in grad school, after a whole career in school where you're learning subject matter that somebody already knows, and your tests are asking you questions that someone already knows the answer to, and that becomes a habit. There's an answer that's already known. It's my obligation to find that right answer. It's probably in that book, or maybe it's asked that person. And for my graduate work, for my PhD, I was mapping a part of the ocean floor off Canada that had never been mapped before. Never been charted properly, much less anyone doing all the geology and geophysics. And there was one particular aspect of it that was really, it was baffling me. I couldn't figure it out. I was now at the point where I have to be able to interpret this data. I've measured all these things, and here's what they mean. Here's what it tells you about this area. And I was going to our science library hours and hours and hours every night, reading every scientific paper, just positive. You keep going because I just haven't found the answer yet. And one night about 3 in the morning, the light bulb went on. There's no point reading every book in this library. The reason you're not finding the answer is no one has ever asked this question before. No one has ever mapped this area before. No one has ever had the data that you have. And I felt like I was skiing down a trail, and I'd hit the point where no one had ever skied in that fresh snow before. There were no tracks to follow. It was my turn to break trail. It was my turn to set the first tracks, and other people would follow, and they would correct and adjust the track that I laid down. But there's no point. What you're looking for is not in a book now. What you're looking for is yours to create for the first time. It was a stunningly cool feeling and slightly intimidating.
Well, there's a lot of unmapped ocean for all these young women to explore. Kira and Sienna Assad, sisters, ask, which do you prefer, space or ocean?
I'm grateful for the fact that I've gotten to do both, because there's something special about each of them that I quite adore. The vistas, the perspective, the grand views of our planet from Earth orbit are beyond describing, just incredible. But the chance to really see the deep sea, and the sea is so alive. I mean, everywhere you go, there's such amazing life forms. And that is just as dazzling to me as the grand panoramas of the space view.
Imogen Coyne asks, where do you think a 7-year-old like myself can look forward to exploring when I grow up?
Oh, you will have huge opportunities to explore inner space, the microscopic, the atomic, outer space, looking at the Earth from orbit. There's still plenty of things to know and learn looking outward to the cosmos. The deep sea will continue to have unknowns that need to be probed. So, there is no end to exploring. You will not run out of interesting frontiers. And as I experienced, a question that no one has ever asked before, and that you get a chance not to find the answer, but to build the answer for the first time. I promise you that can happen for you.
And a number of students, Kathy, have asked this question. Were you ever scared? And that includes from 9-year-old Amelia Callanan. Were you ever scared either going up or going down?
I was not scared, oh, this is crazy scary, I shouldn't do this. And we astronauts joke, we're always anxious about not screwing up, not making big mistakes, because people put a lot of responsibility into your hands, and we care about doing that right and delivering it for them. But I was, I grew up around little airplanes. I grew up around small boats. And so I learned how to handle those things, starting with small baby steps when I was quite young. And I was not personally scared. Now, one of my astronaut classmates in his own book, and he was an experienced combat pilot in the Air Force, he had very different reactions. He writes himself about having the night sweats and being quite scared the night before each launch. So different individuals handle the risk, respond to the risk differently. He still flew. He flew 3 or 4 times, I forget how many, and did a fabulous job. But his his process of dealing with and managing the risk that we were all taking was just very different than mine.
Kathy, we salute you here at Vanity Fair. Thank you for exploring the future of the oceans with me, especially so close to your countdown. So have a great trip down to Challenge Deep.
Thank you, Michelle. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I really appreciate all the questions from the students.